I'm Aaliyah Anderson. I'm the Director of Community Outreach with ULI Washington, and I'm so pleased to see all of you here this morning. Thank you very much for joining us for this event on Federal Triangle South. We're looking forward to our speakers and our breakout sessions this morning. I'm going to take just a moment and walk you through the agenda, but first I want to say a few words of appreciation to the people who really made this event possible. Certainly, first and foremost, GSA and particularly Genevieve Hansen for all her work on the event, NCPC for hosting us here this morning and for a lot of coordination and logistical support in advance, and in particular, Will Herbig, Elizabeth Miller, Diane Sullivan, and Julia Coster for all their support. Boston Properties has donated some space across the hall for us to use this morning, so really want to say thank you to them. And then all of the facilitators and note takers who you will meet later in the breakout sessions. Thank you for their time. A moment on logistics and to walk through the agenda for this morning's event. We have about a little under an hour of an opening session in this room with 4 speakers. We'll ask you to hold your questions for the breakout sessions, which happen next. We're going to do 2 rounds of breakout sessions, and the topics for those breakout sessions will repeat. So space is a little tight in some of the breakout rooms. If you can't fit in the one you want in the first round, please plan on coming back to it the second round. I'll tell you after the opening session where all those breakouts are and direct you. The restrooms are back out towards the elevators and down a hallway that's on your right out the door, and the ladies' room has a passcode on it that's 246. And if you forget, ask Patricia at the front desk. She'll help you out. And with that, I think we'll get started. I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker this morning, Commissioner Dorothy Rubin. She's the Commissioner of the Public Building Service for the U.S. General Services Administration, which puts her at the head of one of the largest and most diversified public real estate organizations in the world. In her role at GSA, Commissioner Rubin oversees the design, construction, leasing, building management, and disposal of approximately 375 million square feet of government-owned and leased space, accommodating over 1 million federal workers and covering all 50 states, 6 U.S. territories, and the District of Columbia. Prior to joining GSA, Commissioner Rubin served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment at the Department of Defense. She's the author or co-author of 2 books on governance and public policy, and she has also worked as Special Assistant to the President for Economic Policy and as a senior staff member of the White House National Economic Council and as an assistant professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Dorothy Rubin.
Thank you. Thanks very, very much. I'm not going to speak for very long this morning. I want to set things up for Genevieve to talk to you about this project, but I do want to kind of set the stage for it so you have a sense of how it is that the GSA came to put this idea on the table. And as with many things, it came out of a certain desperation. We face a couple of very big challenges generally nationwide, but particularly in the National Capital Region, where we have fully a quarter of all of our building inventory in terms of square footage. We face a very aging infrastructure. Our average buildings are close to 50 years old. Many of them are functionally, locationally, physically obsolete or getting there. And they are expensive to operate because they're aging buildings. So that is the starting point for this. And then second, unlike a private building owner, we can't go out to the capital markets and borrow money. We are dependent on something called the Federal Building Fund, which is a fund into which the rents that we charge our tenant federal agencies go. The Federal Building Fund was created in the early 70s as an alternative to having Congress appropriate the funds every year for the public building service, and it worked really quite well for 40 years. Congress gave us access to typically all of the funds that were created, that were collected in the Federal Building Fund, and we could use those funds to build new and to maintain our buildings. The last 3 years, Congress, in a very, very difficult budget environment, the appropriators have diverted about $1.5 billion a year out of the Federal Building Fund into other activities within the Financial Services Subcommittee area. So we are continuing to charge our tenant agencies commercial rents, market-based rents, but in our owned buildings, we are not putting all of that money back into our buildings. In fact, that diversion from the Federal Building Fund has pretty well wiped out our capital program for the last 3 years. So we have had very little money for major repair and alteration and new construction. And then the third challenge, as a result of the first two, aging infrastructure and limited access to capital, we have become more reliant on leased space as opposed to federally owned space. And in the National Capital Region, we spend somewhere between $1 and $2 billion a year on leased space. Now, there may be lessors in the room, and there is definitely a place for leased space for the federal government, but it is more expensive, and it is painful to me to have us writing a check to lessors for that much money every year at the same time that our beautiful buildings here in DC are being neglected. So those are the challenges that we face. What are we doing about those challenges? The first is that we're trying to right-size our portfolio, and you probably saw this part of that involves getting rid of properties that we no longer need, disposing of them. You saw the stories a couple of weeks ago about the final disposition of the Georgetown heating plant, which was an online auction that played out over about a 6-week period and was sold for $19.5 million. We would like to have a civilian BRAC, the civilian version of the base realignment and closure process that DOD has, so that we could dispose of buildings on a much larger scale. The federal government has a lot of excess property. Actually, very little of it is GSA property, but we dispose of property for federal agencies, even if it's not GSA property. So property disposal is a big thing we would like to do more of, but we are downsizing what we have. We are one of I think the most important things GSA is doing is working with federal agencies to get them to reduce their space requirement and increase their space utilization. And a lot of that involves moving to collaborative workspace. Federal workers now, like workers in the private sector, travel are on travel a lot of the time. They telecommute. They are typically at their desk only about a third of the time. We, like the private sector, are moving to workspace configurations that take advantage of that. And if you, we are, Dan Tangerlini, the head of GSA, and I, neither of us have an office. We have workstations, and my workstation is 4 feet from my deputy and another 4 feet from my chief of staff. I have a conference room. If you come see me, which some of you have, I have a very lovely conference room, but I have no office. And it's been a great way for me coming parachuting into GSA 6 months ago. It's been a great way for me to learn. And so we are evangelists about this kind of transformation of the workplace. It is the most significant way that we can reduce the federal government's space requirement. Second, we're lowering our operating costs, the costs of building operations and improving their performance, and a lot of the emphasis there is on energy and sustainability. GSA is really a model for aggressive pursuit of energy efficiency. We have advanced meters in buildings that account for 87% of our electricity consumption. Those are our owned buildings, and we have reduced our electricity consumption by fully a quarter since 2003. We are ahead of the schedule set in statute and set by the White House. We require Energy Star for our large new leases. We are aggressively using energy savings performance contracts. We're doing a lot of things to make our buildings more sustainable. We've been a leader on LEED and other third-party sustainability standards. So that's a big area. It can significantly reduce the cost of operating our buildings. We're moving to smart buildings so that we can track their performance and detect faults through online displays in real time. That's very much the future of buildings for us. So we're, in addition to right-sizing the portfolio, we're reducing the cost of operations. And then third, we're trying to leverage private capital to get around the fact that we don't have as full access to the federal building fund. And I should say that we are, Dan Tangerlini and I have made it a priority to try to get back on track and dig out of the budget hole that we're in, just in terms of the federal building fund, and we'll see how that plays out. The president's budget will go up to the Hill on, I believe it's the 5th or 6th of April, and you'll see the results of the first part of that in the president's budget, and then we'll fight for what we're requesting on the Hill. But in addition to focusing on the federal budget, we are trying to take advantage of leveraging private capital, and this is an example of that. We have a number of innovative financing authorities. Some of them are trickier than others when it comes to something called scoring. You're a Washington audience, so I think many of you know what scoring means. It's a somewhat arcane but incredibly important concept having to do with the way that the Office of Management and Budget and CBO take account of the federal expenditures, and whether a lease is deemed an operating lease versus a capital lease makes all the difference. If it's an operating lease, you pay for it year by year. If it's a capital lease, you have to pay for it all up front, and if you're going to have to pay for it all up front, you might as well build the building. So it's made some of the changes in scoring have made it harder for us to lease. So one of the creative authorities that we have is the exchange authority, the ability to exchange an asset that we have that is that it no longer serves our needs, or that we think is more valuable to the private sector than to the federal government, and we can exchange that for other property, for services, and we are seeking to do that. This is an authority that we have had for a long time, and we've used it in small ways. We've not used it in a big way. The most visible examples are this project in the FBI building, and I'll say something about the FBI building. I just testified on that, and that's an exciting project. That is right across the street. Built in 1974 by GSA, J. Edgar Hoover Building, not one of our best. I think it served its purpose at the time, but there was a lot of conflict. I've read some of the history of the J. Edgar Hoover Building. I mean, it was in the works for a long time, and there was a lot of conflict between the various entities in the district over what that building should look like, and it reflected that lack of a clear sense. But by and large, it was built to do what it was meant to be to do, and that was to be a very large filing cabinet, to be a building in which one could store enormous amounts of paper. And the corridors are very wide and the cement walls are very thick to accommodate that, and it makes it very hard to reconfigure the building for the kind of collaborative workspace that the FBI post 9/11 wants to have in order to facilitate communication and collaboration. And it's not a very space efficient building. It's only a little bit more than half of the gross square footage is actually usable. There is a large courtyard and a public veranda that was meant for parade watching that I don't believe was ever opened. Anyway, it has become something of a fortress, and it only accommodates about half of all the FBI's headquarters staff. And the rest of the staff is spread around in leases around the National Capital Region. So we have proposed to exchange, as one approach, exchange the J. Edgar Hoover Building for a consolidated FBI headquarters somewhere in the National Capital Region. It could be in somewhere else in the district, it could be in Maryland, it could be in Virginia, and there is, as you know, a very active competition going on between these different jurisdictions for where the FBI headquarters will be. So that is an example of how we are seeking to use exchange authority. We're open to other ideas, but that is the idea that we have put forward. We have a building that we think an asset that we think has a lot more value than is currently being realized by the federal government, and it's a best address, and we think there's room for a trade there. Similarly, with Federal Triangle South, we have a group of buildings that are neither space nor energy efficient, very expensive for us to operate in a prime location. Only one of them, the Department of Energy, needs to stay where it is. The GSA regional headquarters, we would love to have that back in the GSA headquarters at 1800 F. The FAA buildings can go any number of, the FAA can go any number of places, so there's a lot of possibilities. We think similarly here as with the FBI building, there is an opportunity to exchange what we have for something that will better suit the federal government's purposes and that will contribute to the wonderful vision that NCPC and the city have laid out for that part of the city. So we have put this on the table. We're at a very early stage. We got 8 or 10 proposals, depending on how you count them. I'm partway through reading them, and they're very, very exciting. I want to thank ULI for putting this on. I want to thank NCPC for hosting it, and do I introduce Genevieve? This is Genevieve Hansen, who is the project manager for Federal Triangle South, and who is going to describe the project. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Thank you guys for coming this morning. I know that we're going to have you guys for about 2.5 hours or so. And we're really appreciative to have ULI organize this event, and of course partnering with NCPC for giving us the space, but also we've been collaborating with NCPC for probably some years now, from 10th Street Task Force and Southwest Eco District, and also Office of Planning, who has been instrumental in helping us frame what can be done on some of the signature streets in the Federal Triangle South area. Thank you, Dr. Rubin, for your opening remarks, and appreciate your insight into what GSA is trending towards right now, and trying to be bold and be creative in our ways of solving for our space needs and our customers' space needs. Wanted to start off asking you guys a few questions. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the L'Enfant Street, L'Enfant area, L'Enfant Plaza area, and wondered how many of you actually go to L'Enfant Plaza area to dine or for entertainment? I see a show of hands. Okay, we've got two here. Okay. And how many of you would describe L'Enfant Plaza area as a place where you would want to live, where you would want to play, where you go to many different restaurants and go to its parks and other recreation? I see one hand, one person. Okay, a couple of people. Okay, three. L'Enfant Plaza is an area that has been sort of a concrete jungle for a number of years, and it's got a number of federal buildings. It's got a number of private office space as well, but it's primarily office buildings and sitting on concrete and not much green space. One of the great things about this project is it's trying to change the face of L'Enfant Plaza, trying to create really a sense of place and create a new sort of placemaking in collaboration with NCPC and Office of Planning. So this site is very unique compared to a number of other sites in the area. And that's one of the reasons why GSA has decided to focus on this area for potential disposition and redevelopment. I'm sure many of you have asked, why are you doing this project? Why this location? Why now? And a number of reasons, as Dr. Rubin pointed out, were really just stark in the minds of GSA senior leadership. One, this Federal Triangle South represents one of the largest clusters of federal government agency buildings that are contiguous, that are adjacent to each other. Another is the 2010 presidential memorandum that where President Obama called for GSA and other federally landholding agencies to make better use out of underutilized or vacant space, or even selling off vacant space. And I think GSA, as well as even Department of Defense, have been moving forward with some vigor in doing so. Another is the fact that the buildings in Federal Triangle South are aging. They range from 49 years old to over 80 years old. So as you can imagine, there's a backlog of repairs. We're talking millions and millions of dollars of repairs. There are just some inefficiencies in the way the space is laid out that doesn't conform to the way the modern worker, performs their work. And these customers are also going through their own space planning efforts and consolidation efforts. So it was kind of a perfect storm where the timing is right, the buildings are in need of repair, so what should we do? And the what should we do is realizing that budget constraints have compelled GSA and other agencies to think more creatively about solving space needs problems. So we realized that after doing some initial analysis on the Federal Triangle South area, that there was this untapped development potential that we could monetize and use that as leverage to exchange with the private sector for new space to be built or to be refurbished. So that's really the intent of this request for information that we plan on moving forward into an RFP. So that really answers the, why this site and why now. And it's great to see that this is a time where GSA is truly moving forward in a pretty fast pace compared to historic trends and reaching out to the private sector to collaborate with us. We know that the development community, you're going to be the builders, you're going to be some of the operators and managers of the new office space. And so it's our intention that we want to make sure that we're getting your ideas. And that's really what the RFI was about, to test the attractiveness of this idea of exchanging our property value for new space and then conveying some of the property for private redevelopment. Also to get a better understanding of what some of the constraints are and how we can together figure out some of the solutions to it. I'm going to jump into the presentation because I don't even know where I'm at right now. So let me point out the Federal Triangle South area. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys can see it over here, but I think most of you are familiar with the site. So we've got really 8 government buildings and 4 customers in this area. That makes about 22 acres. So it's bounded by 12th Street Southwest, Independence Avenue, 6th Street, and portions of D Street and Maryland Avenue. So there's only one building that's actually vacant. It's Cotton Annex. That's a building that's on the National Historic Registry. And then you've got Department of Energy, Forrestal, which is the largest single tenant here. They sit on 11 acres alone, so that's about half of the site. And they've got 4 buildings. You've got FAA has 2 buildings, Orbital and Local Right, and ROB NCR, that's where GSA and DHS are housed. So as I mentioned before, the concept here with this Federal Triangle South initiative, again, is to leverage the property value of this area in exchange for new or more efficient office space. And so some of the objectives of the initiative is, again, first and foremost, part of GSA's mission is to meet the space needs, facility needs of its customers. So that is kind of the first priority that we think about as we assess what can we do and what is the best solution. We certainly want to get some innovative and financially feasible transaction structures. You know, how do we dispose of the property? Is it fee simple? Is it ground lease? Is it, you know, something else? Is it lease back? And also, how do we actually govern the project moving forward? Are we talking, you know, a single master developer, multiple developers? Is it a redevelopment corporation, something like that? And we also need to make sure, because we are stewards of taxpayer dollars, that we, you know, get the best value for U.S. government, GSA, our customers, taxpayers. But in doing all of that, we want a very kind of direct impact of revitalizing this area, you know, bringing more uses, a range of uses. It's great that we've got the museums right on Independence Avenue, but it would be even better if we had more restaurants. I think there's just a handful here. Thank goodness we have food trucks during lunchtime, but it's pretty stark with a range of things for people to do down here. And then also, again, leveraging the good work that Office of Planning and NCPC have done with their plan, Southwest Eco District Plan, Maryland Avenue Plan, seeing how much of those ideas can be leveraged in the solution for this Federal Triangle South area. So I just went over a couple of items regarding the existing conditions. But what's interesting when we talk about, you know, trying to monetize that, the kind of excess development opportunity there, right now the existing site is built to about 4 million square feet, but under existing zoning, you've got 6.2 million that you can build to, and that doesn't even include, you know, PUDs or TDRs or anything like that. So the potential is great, and that's assuming that, you know, all buildings remain standing. You may have more development potential if you had some flexibility with reconfiguration. This is an incredible transportation node, as many of you may know. Riding on the metro, LaFont Plaza is, or the LaFont Metro is the only metro that has 4 different lines going to it. You also have the VRE train station as well, and you've got Amtrak that comes right through this area as well, and you're very close to some of the main highways of this area. We've already talked about how there's kind of it's a food desert out here, and that's something that desperately want to improve. And in terms of public realm, there's just about a 1-acre park out of the 21.5 acres. So that's kind of an area where there needs to be some programming. So talking about what the agencies need, again, is very critical. We've got currently over 14,000, 12,000 employees that are in FTS right now. But what our request for information asked for was to solve for 14,000 employees. And I think Dr. Rubin already mentioned some of the needs from GSA, FAA. We also have a division of Department of Homeland Security that's looking for consolidation, and Department of Energy would like to consolidate their space as well along Independence Avenue. And it can be anywhere along Independence Avenue within the Federal Triangle South space. And each of these agencies have 4 different locations. So as you can imagine, in project governance and figuring out the phasing and sequencing of this project, it can be very complex. And we want to implement this vision in a way that doesn't disrupt our agency's mission, having them, get their job done. Because Federal Triangle South resides in the larger Southwest Eco District area, we want to make sure that we're aligning our design and construction guidelines with that vision as well, and seeing where, if GSA has standards that even exceed what is outlined in the Southwest Eco District plan, that we propose that and we build to that, and maybe there's some lessons learned that GSA can provide in terms of best practices for sustainability. I know that Dr. Rubin has had an illustrious career in sustainability, so that has been extremely helpful, in our process of figuring out what makes sense. Dr. Rubin also touched upon a couple of different disposition types that we're looking at. So, of course, if we, in the reconfiguration of this site and determining what's best for our customers, there could be places on the site where we retain government ownership. We are also looking at ground lease opportunities, whether it's historic or non-historic land. We're looking at exchange for real property, as well as exchange for services, and services meaning primarily construction services or tenant improvements, and also looking at leaseback as a potential option. And we'll be talking more about some of these disposition options and the project governance as we break out in sessions, as well as land use. And I think my time might be up. I think of 1 minute. Okay. So I'll just go over real quickly our process and schedule. I think I'd mentioned, this RFI is step 1 of a 2-step process. The second step would be an RFP, where we actually award some portion of the site or all of the site to some form of development team, or GSA could wear that development hat as well, and collaborate with developers. But nonetheless, we did issue an RFI back at December 3rd, and I think some of you in this room, I know some of you in this room have submitted responses for it, and we received responses on March 4th. And the team has been kind of working pretty, vigorously to prepare a recommendation for our GSA senior leadership. But in essence, we feel great about what we received. We heard from the development community that this is a wonderful opportunity. The devil's always in the details, how to make the numbers work, but we heard that it was attractive, that there is partnership opportunities, and it can be a win-win solution. So where we're going now is we're hoping to present a recommendation to GSA senior leadership within a few months that will be vetted to key stakeholders, and at that time, probably in the fall or so, we'll make a determination on what form or type a solicitation will be in, and hopefully, let's say about 6-9 months from there, we'll be able to determine an award of some type again, and really start implementation. So I think the big hook is pulling me off. Thank you guys so much. Now Diane Sullivan is going to talk about the NCPC Southwest Eco District Plan, which has created kind of the framework for the vision of Federal Triangle South. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to you for a brief 10 minutes about the Southwest Eco District Plan. I think many of you have heard this presentation before. This is just going to be some highlights, and you also are probably familiar that in January, the National Capital Planning Commission voted on and accepted this plan as a roadmap for revitalizing about 110 acres south of the National Mall, this area that we've been talking about so far today. 3 years ago, NCPC pulled together about 17 federal and local agencies to create the Southwest Eco District Task Force. And we worked very hard in studying the existing area and coming up with this strategy and development scenario for the revitalization of this wonderful place south of the mall. And it really started with the framework plan, which NCPC completed in 2009, and looked at this area as a new place for creating new museums and memorials because we're sort of, to take pressure off of the National Mall. And then also at the same time, President Obama had signed Executive Order 13514, basically looking at sustainability and economic performance. And NCPC at the time had been looking at places or federal precincts throughout Washington, D.C. to try and figure out if there was an opportunity for us to create an eco-district to actually plan beyond the individual building and try to achieve more from a sustainability perspective. And looking at the requirements in the executive order, we realized that it's very difficult to meet some of them in already built buildings in such urban areas. And this was an opportunity for us to think a little bit bigger, use infrastructure and other places to actually try to achieve some of those water and energy goals. So we sort of married those two projects, and that's how the Southwest Eco District was born. This is our project area. It's a little bit bigger than the Federal Triangle South boundary. As Genevieve mentioned, you have the Department of Energy, the two FAA buildings up to the north of our boundary, the regional office building, and Cotton Annex, all part of the Federal Triangle South. But our boundary actually extends all the way down to the waterfront, recognizing that this is a critical link in the city that needs to be made. And 10th Street or L'Enfant Promenade is certainly one of the best ways to do that, especially with the new waterfront development project going in. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the buildings today, because I think that between Dr. Rubin and Genevieve, we've heard a lot about GSA's thinking. If there's an underlying theme to my remarks today, it's going to be about infrastructure in this area. We have some infrastructure as barriers, and I'm not going to say it's bad, but it definitely serves as a barrier for trying to get from the National Mall, from downtown to the waterfront. We have the freeway, the CSX rail line, and then you have practically our one existing street, 10th Street, which is about 230 feet wide. It's a lot of concrete. And then we're missing a lot of infrastructure. Some of the blocks here are almost 10 acres, and it's enormous. There's no streets here. It exists on 3 different levels, and it's very difficult to get around. And so we are very excited about the Federal Triangle South project and other redevelopment that's happening here as an opportunity to really bring that infrastructure back. It is definitely the key to solving, I think, a lot of the problems in this area. And so we've heard a lot about Federal Triangle South. Again, very exciting. What we haven't talked about, because I know it's sort of a different project, but GSA is also working on actually going through the same sort of study with the central utility plant that's here today. And I can't speak for GSA, but I do want to say that in studying the district energy opportunities within the Southwest Eco District, the task force definitely saw this plant as a huge opportunity to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions here, both for federal buildings and private buildings. I recognize that that is not possible legally at this time, but the plan definitely has this as its main strategy, hooking up both new development that will come in the future and the existing federal buildings to receive their heating and cooling from this plant. It really has an amazing impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. The city, which Tracy's going to talk about in just a minute, is investing millions of dollars in the Maryland Avenue Transportation Study, which is very exciting. Again, this is a big infrastructure piece that needs to be solved and could do so much for this area. The city's also looking at the long Long Bridge capacity study, and without going into a lot of detail, that has huge implications for the L'Enfant Metro Station. Again, one of the biggest opportunities that we have here in terms of, as Genevieve mentioned, all the metro lines and the commuter rail coming in here as well. And then finally, we have an enormous amount of opportunity and development going on behalf of the private sector. The wharf development obviously is breaking ground this year. JBG is looking at putting a new building in at L'Enfant Plaza, which is very exciting. And then the private development community is also looking at starting a business improvement district here, which we feel is an opportunity for us to have another call it a governance entity, what you will, to help sort of move the eco-district vision forward here. So our goals really were focused on transforming the 10th Street and Maryland Avenue corridors into a highly sustainable, well-connected mixed-use community. And to do this by creating an environmental showcase, and that is an eco-district. And really what we mean by that is planning beyond the individual building scale. We really felt that you could achieve so much more in terms of energy and water and waste, looking at this sort of neighborhood precinct scale, than if you were to just tackle each individual building. Again, another reason why we're so excited about what GSA is doing with Federal Triangle South. So how do you do that? It's very difficult to take a federal office precinct like what we have with huge blocks, no streets, and to transform that into a mixed-use community. But I do think that we've come up with a pretty good development scenario for this area. This is not, the way it has to be, but this was, in terms of meeting our goals, it definitely was one of the best scenarios that we could see for this area. And so we basically started out by developing a framework, a neighborhood development framework, and also an environmental framework. The neighborhood development framework started to look at if you were to infuse a mix of uses here. The city studied how much you would need to actually, how much residential would really tip this to become an actual mixed-use neighborhood. That's about 1,000 units. We ended up putting a little bit more here in our land use breakdown, but focused it sort of around the area a little bit south of Independence. So we kept the Independence corridor as federal and cultural, but saw the opportunity to infuse a new mix of uses a little bit south of there, and especially as you move towards the waterfront. And then the plan also looks at activating street frontages, and these are some of the things that we'll talk about in the breakout sessions today. How to connect existing public spaces, create new ones, and connect those with new opportunities for museums and memorials and cultural opportunities as well. And so, again, we will be talking about that in the public realm breakout session today. The street grid, here we are back at infrastructure again, how to reconnect the street grid. I mean, we added 17 new intersections here by reintroducing the L'Enfant street grid, and it really does an amazing job at just sort of allowing more access for people to get in and around this area, and actually breaks up the blocks so that you can have buildings that are still quite large but are much more efficient in terms of energy as well. And then also looked at sort of, in reintroducing this street grid, what you would be able to, how you would characterize some of these streets. Some of them would obviously be more monumental in character, some of them more neighborhood in scale, more civic. And we're actually working with the city right now and trying to sort of determine how this might actually play out. And so in terms of energy, I mentioned, we looked at the block, and we looked at the building block and district scale, taking a lot of notes from what GSA has already done. We have looked at the solar thermal, the solar photovoltaics, ground source heat, which they did the Switzer building, and then really focused on the central utility plant, which you can see some of the existing lines here, and really bringing on some of the private buildings. And then with water, again, took the district energy approach, district water approach, and put cisterns underneath 10th Street, which could capture all of the stormwater in this area and provide it for reuse for all of the new buildings that might be coming here in the future. And then obviously a lot of green infrastructure strategies, really greening up this area so that it looks like an eco district. We spent a lot of time looking at how the buildings were performing today, and that really informed a lot of the development scenario itself in terms of what would be redeveloped and what might remain. And if you were to walk through, what it looks like today, rehabilitating buildings that we think are going to be here for quite a while, and only, lightly rehabbing some of the buildings that we think would ultimately come down. Repurposing, we did see the opportunity to actually privatize some of the buildings that are there today. And then, this is interesting. Here's where an opportunity to just infill around some vacant area or land that's underutilized right now. This is the point where you would start to reintroduce a street grid. And then the big redevelopment moves, which would be the Forestall site and developing over the freeway, which is doable in this area. And so there's the final composite of what it could look like, which is very different. The plan lays out 4 different focus areas: 10th Street, Independence Corridor, the 7th Street Maryland Avenue corridor, and then the freeway. There's a lot of detail in the plan about that. And we have the model out here, and I'm just going to wrap up in showing you some before and after images here. This is Independence. And again, focusing on infrastructure, you can see how reintroducing the street grid actually breaks up the buildings to a much more pedestrian-friendly scale and sustainable. And here's 10th Street. A much more vibrant corridor, 10th Street, seeing, not highly used by traffic, much more of a program space, park-like. And here's another perspective looking again at the Department of Energy site and reintroducing Virginia Avenue and 11th Street and C Street. And then this is looking back towards Reservation 113, the park that the building sort of turn its back to the park. And there would be decking of Maryland Avenue and the park itself. And then there's the regional office building from the VRE station. You can see the Department of Energy in the background. And again, if you reintroduced Virginia Avenue, you can now see the monument in the background, which would be a great way to orient yourself. You're so close to the National Mall, but you would never know it. And in summary, in doing this, we're adding about 4 million square feet of development here. Adding about 100,000 square feet of new commercial space. We saw about the possibility for 1.8 million square feet of residential and or hotel use. We have the opportunity to improve about 14.3 acres of parkland, which is, you sort of forget that actually already exists here today, but it definitely needs improvement. And then in doing so, in doing our district energy and water strategies, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 51%. That's, in addition to adding 4 million square feet of development. We're capturing all of our rainwater. And I have to say, one of the things we're studying right now is what that means financially in terms of the impervious surface charges that are going to be escalating substantially in the future. For both the federal property and private property, and what that would mean in terms of achieving stormwater credits and how much you could actually earn from selling those. So that's an important study underway right now. And then we are also actually designing 10th Street right now and creating sort of a phased look at how you could improve that connection from the National Mall to the waterfront. And so we'll be back in front of our commission for an informational presentation on that in May, and also improving the connection from the top of Banneker down to the wharf. So I know that I am out of time, and so I'm going to turn it over now to hear a little bit more from the city about what they're doing to Tracy Gabriel, the Associate Director for Neighborhood Planning with the DC Office of Planning.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Well, good morning. I'm Tracy Gabriel. As mentioned, I'm Associate Director of Neighborhood Planning at the Office of Planning here for the district. And this morning, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the planning context from the city's perspective for Federal Triangle South, and then also talk to you more specifically about our planning work for Maryland Avenue Southwest Small Area Plan. So I think it's very important to think about Federal Triangle South from the perspective of downtown and how our conception of downtown is growing. And we would like to see sort of that notion of downtown extend and connect to the waterfront. And Federal Triangle South is among a number of targeted locations where we're anticipating catalytic new mixed-use development near the waterfront. And so there's some guidance from our comprehensive plan for this area. And specifically, I wanted to emphasize the idea of livability on former federal lands, now they're current federal lands, but the opportunity really to introduce a mixed-use environment. I think we've heard everyone say we need vitality, we need more activity, and part of that equation is introducing residential. And I'm not sure if it was noted, but there is a goal for 30% residential as part of the Southwest Eco District Plan, and that also reflects the city's goal of seeing more residential in this area as part of a broad redevelopment. Also reestablishing rights of ways and opening spaces, and just enhancing the pedestrian character, and again, mitigating the scale of these monolithic buildings. So some other district goals for this area, again, promoting that mix of uses, bringing residents to this area, finding opportunities to provide public-oriented improvements, reestablishing the l'enfant streets, enhancing parks and open spaces, and of course, importantly, promoting environmental sustainability. So right here you have the comp plan's future land use map, and this area is designated as a high-density commercial, residential, and government area. And so what does that translate to? In general, zoning can't be inconsistent with the comp plan, so this area is already designated for a high density. Some portions of Federal Triangle South do have underlying zoning in this district, and that's C3C. It's also a transfer of development rights receiving zone. So there's opportunity to enhance densities through that system. And there's no zoning now for federal properties, but in general, DC considers zoning necessary for non-federal uses, and we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to gloss over this. The groups that actually speak about land use will get into greater depth about the zoning, but you can take a look here. Essentially, for those areas that are zoned, there's about a 6.5 non-residential FAR and a height limit of 90 feet. And there's also credit systems that would be part of this new approach that we're also taking for the district. I should also note that we're undergoing, as some of you probably are well aware, a zoning regulations review. And as part of that, we're also looking at this area for a downtown sort of mixed-use zone. So that'll have impact as well. And again, I just want to underscore this unique opportunity that exists here. And I think the city finds it extremely exciting as GSA tries to get creative about ways to accomplish your goals and sort of an aging infrastructure of office buildings, is that this also creates opportunity to sort of disperse and retain federal agency employment throughout the district. And also, as you'll talk about in your transaction group, is the opportunity to think creatively about swaps and about ways to create value for GSA through innovative ways to, say, rehab existing office buildings. And we see that as an opportunity to activate other parts of the district and perhaps outside of the central area. And now to talk more specifically about the Maryland Avenue Southwest Plan. This planning effort really closely dovetailed the Southwest Eco District planning effort. It was really two plans, one process, and with really overarching and complementary goals. And I would say that the purpose of this plan was to look at the feasibility of reestablishing Maryland Avenue Southwest as a mixed-use corridor flanked by infill development. Right now, this is Maryland Avenue in our study area today. Not too inviting. But the study area extended from 6th Street Southwest to 12th Street Southwest along the Maryland Avenue corridor, which is essentially the CSX rail corridor at present. But as already discussed, this is really a monolithic office environment, but it is rich in its transit assets. 20,000 Metro users go through L'Enfant Plaza every day, and another 80 trains also go through this corridor between, CSX, but also Amtrak and VRE. So, some of the vision for this is really, again, to create Maryland Avenue as a mixed-use corridor. And that has to do with creating a number of vital connections. It's basically connecting Maryland Avenue to the existing street grid and to the transit assets that exist in this area. It is about establishing economic connections by creating new infill development, predominantly a mix of uses, and then also reestablishing a critical historic and visual connection to the Capitol through a vista to that. And there are a number of things that came together that made the ripe for a planning effort. And that was, one was GSA's thought about a land conveyance of some of the, I should say, extra properties along that corridor and the opportunities to create more infill development along those edges. And they're noted in 4 parcels, which actually comprise about 1.5 acres of land. And that's those 4 sites noted here. Also, as I mentioned, the city is undergoing this zoning regulation review. And as part of that process, we are looking at a downtown zone for this area. CSX is undergoing their National Gateway Initiative, which for this area is about lowering the tracks to allow for double-stacked freight trains. So that's something that they're trying to accomplish by the end of 2015. And of course, NCPC's Southwest Eco District is a broader area and comprises also the Maryland Avenue Southwest. And this was a street that once was part of the L'Enfant plan, and it's really undergone a lot of change over the last 2 centuries. And it's not anything new that we're trying to reestablish throughout the city. Restoring the original street grid. And for Maryland Avenue Southwest, as early as the 1980s, there was efforts to deck over and reestablish the street grid, and that happened west of 12th Street. We had a advisory committee that comprised a number of stakeholders, including many in this room. But these are some of the feedback we got, which you'll see reflects the objectives that I'll talk about. This is some of the studies that we did, is looking at specifically how would you be able to deck that over and make that possible and feasible from a physical perspective. We also looked at, from a market perspective, at GSA's 4 sites along that corridor, and I think our market study suggested that that residential was needed, but it was needed part of a broader change to the entire district through the Southwest Eco District, and that a critical mass of about 1,000 units of residential housing was needed. And you couldn't really accomplish that on just the 4 infill sites alone, and that the market movers are outside of that specific core, but it's part of a long-term vision for the area. Again, the plan provides some land use and development guidance for how to move forward. It's thought that maybe this process for at least Maryland Avenue could take up to 30 years to realize. So being able to lay out the critical steps that need to occur for the variety of implementers that exists and for developers was a really important part of the plan. So some of the recommendations, probably the largest recommendation is to reestablish Maryland Avenue as a 160-foot wide corridor, a continuous one between 9th Street and 12th Street Southwest. Also to diversify land uses, as we said multiple times, creating new infill mixed-use development along the corridor. Improving transit access that includes, obviously, restoration of the grid, but also better connections to L'Enfant Plaza, and the creation actually of even a 4-track system or station there that could be more of a multimodal enhancement. Public realm is really important. I think everyone's underscored it, that right now it's more of a concrete jungle, and there's also sustainability goals that can be achieved through infrastructure. So one of the goals here is to, for Maryland Avenue, is to create somewhat of a green spine and use that as a way to enhance sustainability, also to create more of a signature open space at Reservation 113, and in general, making it a lively and viable and more a greener space. There's a lot of challenges to overcome, as I mentioned. It's a sort of a long-term vision, but I would say that there's 5 entities that own the right-of-way, so there's a lot of coordination that will go into that. Obviously, it's also pricey, but we have a number of studies, as mentioned by Diane, that we are moving forward with and are creating momentum to sort of realize the vision. And additional action steps that we're focusing on from the Office of Planning is looking at these underpasses that are uninviting and sort of break up the neighborhood and see ways that we can look to, at least in the interim, provide an enhancement for pedestrians going through. That's it. Thanks.